So if you watch this in order, and you probably didn't, this is the third part of a 3-part series with Jorge Quintero, and we're going to talk about the industry of the mental brain health, psychology, neuroscience, and that's probably a problem in itself. We go by so many names, and that's whatever, but we're going to talk about that. And my first thing is to call out the industry is you got to step outside the box. Obviously, you need to know your research. Obviously, you understand the fundamentals, the foundations. Now, do you need to be a jack of all trades like us and try to know a little bit of everything? No. But you have to be open at least to there's other modalities, there's other things you can learn to add to your repertoire. Like you have exercise, you have a engineering background. So you were far removed from this industry, but yet you were able to adapt and learn these things. I have people who literally went through 8+ years of counting grad school of clinical psychology or neuroscience or something in that realm, and they don't know anything without 5 feet of that industry. If it goes away from that, they're like first graders. And I think that's the biggest problem in the industry of understanding this is a multifaceted approach to improving brain and mental health. So that's where we should start, I think. What do you think?
I agree. I think when you have experience in very disparate fields, you gain a very unique advantage, which is you can synthesize something that very few people have thought about. And I think that you and I are perfect examples of creating some, like literally our own lane of a business that didn't exist before. So from one side, we should be championing everyone's unique experiences because everyone has a perspective, a truth that is unique to them that they can share with other people to improve other people's lives. Like there's many people that dedicate themselves to preaching about nutrition because they strongly believe nutrition can change people's lives regardless of what illness or disease they have. People on the exercise spectrum, people on the psychology spectrum, people in the psychiatry spectrum. We all think we have a solution. And maybe to a certain extent that's all partly true, but I think a fuller truth is somewhere in the middle where you can meet at a crossroads and take from great things from this industry and another few great things from that industry, and you'll find that when you combine them, you create a more holistic or comprehensive approach that can hit more than one area. I personally, when I work out, I try to select exercises that are not just like very singular in their benefit. Like I'm not just trying to increase my bicep size. I'm trying to increase my bicep size, increase flexibility, increase my joint strength, increase my range of motion in the movement. Like I'm thinking about various levels to this, and I think we have to start thinking that way too as practitioners. It's like, okay, I'm used to incorporating these tools, but what other tools am I missing that could augment what I'm doing?
I'll tell you from firsthand experience that, matter of fact, I'll use a perfect example from my class that we just had on Thursday. I teach part-time at a school called Kaiser University. Their main campus, they have tens of thousands of students worldwide online, but they have a main campus in West Palm Beach, Florida. And I teach there 2 days a week, a class on sports psychology. And the lesson I just had, I went on one of my rants with them because they'll know if any of them watch this. And I was saying how I asked them to raise your hand if your coach believed that the mental aspect of your sport is very important. Every athlete raised their hand. Then I said, okay, second question. How many of them have a dedicated time to teach it or present it in any kind of way? Not like how we do it, just any type of way. This could be a workshop. It could be a lecture. It could be a training session. It could be an exercise. All their hands went down. And that's weird because all the coaches agree that it's a big part. What's the famous saying? It's 90% mental, 10% physical. But the actual practice does not resemble that. And we talked about this last night about how I said 10 to 15 years. I know you mentioned there's a place working more, I guess it's a specific way they're doing it with, you mentioned, I think Lifetime Athletics. But I personally think it's 10 to 15. And what I mean by that is in the scheme of where when I ask that question to athletes or any practitioner in any sense, their hands stay up when I say, are you doing it? Whether that's 5 minutes, 10 minutes, a warm up, integrating it, or having a standalone, which that's where I think we want to get to. Like people like us, when it gets to the point where standalone mental and brain performance training is a thing. But I'll take the integration because that's how I do a lot of mine, because time, money, working with teams, get what you can, right? That's the realistic, in my opinion. You got to get what you can right now. But 10 to 15 years is my prediction, but maybe you have a different take on when we get to that point when it's a standalone training.
Let me tell you something that's really interesting about exercise, like these fitness training programs. I think 100%, besides the people that do the cognitive training, almost every trainer is missing opportunities for gains. We'll call them cognitive gains, by not training the mind every single workout session. Why? Because we understand, okay, if we train physically, I'm going to see some increase in my muscle size or whatever athletic quality I'm training for. But at the same time that I'm moving, I'm releasing all of these chemicals in my brain. The BDNF, the increased blood flow, the irisin, the increased neurogenesis. All of these things are still happening, but they don't do anything with it. It's like you flowered the garden with the Miracle Grow, but you didn't plant anything. So every single workout that these trainers are doing, they are literally missing gains. And like you said, they all understand that the mental component is important, but I think there's maybe a gap in understanding from a creative standpoint, from a practical standpoint, how do we assess, measure, and track cognitive gains? And I think that's where people like you and me need to step in and create a framework that becomes more accessible to the industry, because like you said, if it's not within 5 feet of their expertise or their subject matter expertise, they're like a deer in the headlights.
Yeah.
So we, like people like us that can synthesize these kinds of creative processes, have to step in to accelerate that adoption. But I still go back to saying, like, you know, people can think that it's a gimmick or it's a waste of time or it's not important enough to program. But the reality is, y'all are missing gains. You're creating all the favorable milieu and chemicals that would change your brain anyway, but you're not doing anything to change the brain. So it's wasted. It's a wasted opportunity.
I feel like the word gimmick is, we use it numerous times throughout all the series. But one time, the fitness industry was seen as a gimmick, because I would say before the 1950s, 60s, it was more like the sideshow guys who were big and muscular, and they would be in the freak show and like, look at the muscle man. He's the world's strongest man. He's holding like the iron dumbbell that's like 200 pounds, which was a big feat of strength. But then it segued into bodybuilding with like the Arnold Schwarzeneggers in the 50s and 60s. And then that became like the big cardio outbreak with the Olivia Newton-John, let's get physical. And what's the guy he just passed recently? Richard Simmons. So that was all seemed gimmicky at a point until it wasn't. Even strength and conditioning with colleges. There was a guy, I forget his name, but he was with the University of Nebraska in the early 80s or late 70s. And he had this idea like, our athletes, they're fast or strong, they need to be performing. What if we made them lift weights and do conditioning exercises? When you think that make them faster and stronger? And obviously that was like obvious, but colleges were not doing this. Yeah, they might have trained here and there, but he said, let's make this a systematic part. And for years, it was kind of like, whatever. But what happened? Nebraska won the national championship in, I forget the exact year, but it was the early 80s. And then the other school said, maybe we should get a strength coach. And another school said, we should get a strength coach. I guarantee you, not even D3. Matter of fact, NAIA, probably even to junior college, no team would not have a strength coach. Now, the reason I bring this up, let's flip-flop that to the mental. So in the sports psych realm where I come from, I did a conference a few weeks ago, and I would say, I think statistically, I looked it up, 57% of Division I schools have some sort of mental coach. It's not necessarily psychology or not necessarily mental skills. It might be both. So meaning therapy versus more like skill building, like stress management. They have something, 57%. So that's not bad for D1. D2, 1AA, it dramatically drops to like 10 to almost nothing. But you see the disparity, and going back to the reason I brought up the word gimmick is, going to why I said 10 to 15 years, we're getting closer, but I think we're at a standstill only because we have all these people coming out the woodwork who are like, not, because this industry is not regulated at all. Yeah, you're doing your due diligence. I did my due diligence. I got numerous degrees. You're getting your master's in neuroscience. But most people who preach this stuff aren't degreed. And not saying it's the end all be all, but I do think they should have it for the simple fact of it shows that they're foundationally sound. Now, can you learn this stuff without a degree? Sure. But let's be realistic. Most of these people aren't doing the foundational stuff. They're giving the more manifest, like we're talking about manifest, the life coach stuff. Like, did you know the brain, when you think about a habit, over 2 weeks, it'll reform? It's like, no, that's not exactly how, there's something to, it's like a half truth. Right. And I think that's diluting our industry to a degree too. So when you say me and you and people who are similar, it's almost like not a war. I want to use that because I want to sound violent, but I mean in the sense of we're fighting a battle where a lot of people aren't on this side.
Yeah, they're not. And I would agree with you. I think at least the people in the neuroscience community that are coming out of the woodwork, they're like literature warriors. Like they will read the latest literature. They're gonna tell you what's the best way to live your life based on the science. That's great and all. Like I agree. There's a lot of things to be said about protocols and things like Dr. Huberman that, you know, creates a structure for getting better health. But the reality is more nitty gritty than like you're saying. You can't just build a habit in 21 days, especially if it's a deeply entrenched habit that you're trying to replace. It doesn't take 21 days. It's sometimes a lifelong process. But we have to stop thinking that the literature is the end all be all. There are many people that are providing value that are actually practitioners that are not just citing statistics and facts about the brain and making a living off of that, but actually trying to implement something new from the literature. So you're taking all your foundational concepts about how the brain works, how mental health works, and you're creating a framework that addresses these issues. Typically, the literature will stop at the issue at hand. Like, they will define it. They will tell you all the things that could go wrong with it. They will understand what happens to the brain when something bad happens. But there's not a lot of literature about, okay, how do we actually improve this? And how do we improve this not in a clinical sense? It's always like, okay, we gave drugs to these people, these are the outcomes, and these are the scores or whatever. That's great. There's a space for that. But for practitioners and for people that are not in the medical fields, there needs to be something else. Like, there needs to be another practical framework that we can implement with clients that isn't just citing statistics and thinking that this is the right way that we should all be living.
Yeah, the going back to the literature, what do you call it? Literature warriors. So I never heard that one before, but yeah, I agree. Because remember the song I was talking about earlier? I put it on Instagram a few months back. It was the Kendrick Lamar diss to Drake, "Not Like Us." So I called it "Brain Damage," on brand, right? And I was literally, one of my lines was, I said, the research, everybody reciting it, all this information, but ain't nobody applying it. Right. I wrote that line specifically for what you just said. We need it. I 100% agree. I read literature all the time. I tell my students, I only got to this point because I know my stuff because I studied it. But if it stopped there, I'm not where I'm at right now. The biggest thing, and we talked about your trilingual, you speak 3 languages, and I think going to my analogy of how people step out their expertise and then they lose it, I think they need to be at least bilingual in the sense of navigating between different fields of performance. Because let's say you're a clinical person. You probably need to learn a little bit of the neuro. Say you're a neuro person, you need a little bit of the clinical. Let's say you have a little bit of both, you need to learn some of that exercise physiology. Right. Or all the above. Honestly, all the above, because if you understand exercise physiology, then you're better equipped to handle someone who has performance issues from the physical standpoint. Because if I'm a therapist, right, and I stop at, okay, you need to be able to cope with your negative emotions, you need to be able to not internalize every negative aspect of your life. Cool. Maybe you should get out more. Maybe you should do this. Maybe you should do that. But if I'm limited to just those advices, but I'm not telling you how to be a better physical being, because people think, oh, that's vain because they get into like maybe the body positivity or whatever it is. It's not even about looking good or being in total shape. It's more so saying we have this human vessel that interacts with the both physical and psychological and cognitive components. So if we're not doing all of those to some degree, it's like having a car, right? I know I'm an analogy junkie, but it's like having a car and you put a bunch of like clean car wash wax and all that good stuff, but you haven't got an oil change in in a year and a half. That's like having a good physical, but no mental. Or you get all your oil changes and whatever, but you never clean it. So it's like you need to do a little bit of both. You don't have to have the perfect car, right? You don't have to have the shiniest rims, but you shouldn't have a dirty car, and you shouldn't have a car that's never been maintenance. So I think that's the way, as a practitioner, with people out there who are watching this are practitioners, you can be better to your population by having at least an understanding. You don't need to get a PhD in exercise science if you're a therapist, or you don't need to get a psychology degree if you're a personal trainer. Just understand this stuff to at least intro level, you know? That's how I see it.
Yeah, you gotta understand it at least at a working level. And I guess going back to the criticism of the industry, I think one of the biggest reasons why we don't see this integration in different fields is that we have an obsession with specialization.
Yeah.
And also in the healthcare industry, the time that a patient has with clinicians is very limited. Like it's 15 minutes usually max. So there is a need for practitioners, not necessarily in the clinical space. Maybe they're associated tangentially, but we have to create this framework of health that goes beyond the clinician to actual practitioners that can positively make a difference and not ostracize them. Because you obviously have the reactionary side, which is people developing chronic diseases, quote unquote, overnight, that now is a huge problem to their life. But as we know, these chronic issues don't just appear overnight, they develop over decades. So there's a proactive side to this that we need to focus on more. And the fitness industry, I think, is starting to get this. Like they're starting to see themselves as preventative health and preventing chronic diseases in the general population. But we have to think about this also from, like you said, the cognitive side. We're making strides on the physical, but what about the mental? We're still stuck with pills and we're still stuck with therapy for the most part. And if it's not that, there's a ton of people that will, like, I even have to be careful with what I say, because if I say that I could cure a mental health disorder, like I would probably get sued. I'd probably like get sent to oblivion by the healthcare industry, and you would never see me again. I'm not saying that I can cure it, but I'm saying that I can make a big impact in addition to what these other practitioners are doing, like clinicians, psychologists, psychiatrists. So we've got to expand the network of people that are working with these populations, and we have to welcome them. We can't ostracize them.
And that's why I created Mind Body One. It literally was meant to be a resource where you're getting multiple aspects of performance. There's no one size fits all, but we can approach as many as we can, because I've heard therapists say on like LinkedIn, I saw someone post like a continuum, and it was funny because everything they were saying that needs to be provided, and they said you can't get it from one place. And I would say yes and no. There's certain aspects you probably won't get from one place. You're probably not going to get therapy from another practice or the same practitioner, because that differs in a lot of things, ethically, just the logistics of what's going on. Because if I'm talking to you about those traumatic issues, I probably shouldn't be going to you for a workout per se. So you can recommend it, but outside of that, I would say they can be the same person or same company or whatever. Because like I said, I have a sector of my business where I have people on my team who are only strength and conditioning. They have no psych background at all. And I have people who have, like me, veering both, and I have people who are only the psych background or the mental perspective. So it is a way we can deliver these. And that's why I was going back to that specialization thing. I was at that conference, same when I was talking about earlier in Vegas, where I asked students, what's your next step? And they mentioned I won't say the name of it, but the certifying body of that organization. They said that's their next step. And I was like, but what are you going to do? They had no answer. And it was like a gotcha moment, but it wasn't meant to be. She literally froze up and said, I don't know. And she felt kind of embarrassed, but I didn't want to put her on the spot. It was just an honest question because I was just networking. But my point I'm bringing up, she was so specialized on, I want to be a certified, I'm about to say it, but I want to be a mental coach. And it was like, but what are you going to do with it? Because that's a specialization, yes. But that role encapsulates so many different things, but they're not teaching that. So I got to put some of the blame on the schools and organizations, because not saying that they need to touch everything, but they got to show these students when they come out, you got the degree, how do I make it work now? And that's going to work for the clients. So everyone wins, but that's not the model, because we get into the semantics of the business of education in itself, but that's a whole different topic. So to wrap things up, because I like to do something called the take home two. I only did it on this one because we obviously did 3 parts. So since it's the last one, so how this one works is I put you on the spot. So as I'm saying this, think about it. You need to give us at home 2 things that they can take home. Meaning it could be a phrase, it could be a tip, it could be a trick, a tool, but something, 2 things that is that they can take home. And as soon as they cut off this podcast and go about their day, they can put it in effect right then and there.
Yes. So I would say number one, the number one take home message from the NeuroGym, and I hope from this conversation, is that your brain is very plastic all throughout life, and that same capability to change doesn't go away just because you have a mental health disorder. It could be impaired, but you can actually make a difference. And one of the most generic ways to improve your mental health is just to start moving. If you're not doing anything, start walking. If you're already walking, go for a run. If you're interested in lifting weights, start lifting weights. But moving is always going to be better than not moving, and you will feel that. No one has ever regretted doing a workout unless they got injured. The second thing that I will say is the biggest take-home message is the this idea that the mind doesn't exist in isolation. Like, we shouldn't treat the mind as this vague thing that's kind of floating over here on the right, and the physical health is over here on the left. No, we just talked for almost an hour about how the brain and the body interact, and how exercise is a great vehicle to tackle both. So we have to start integrating things from exercise science, things from neuroscience, things from psychology, to create a more integrative and holistic approach. So another thing that I would say, like a tip, is, just as you're intentional with your workouts, become intentional with your mental workouts. Like, what exactly are you trying to train, and does your training reflect the things that you want out of that training? If you feel like you can't focus, are you doing anything about that? Are you maybe changing your diet? Are you getting more sleep? Are you exercising? I put all these under the umbrella of training because they're inputs.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, I'll just leave it at that.
All right. So let them know where they can find you on social media, website, plug that. I'll put it on the screen, obviously.
Yeah, so it was a pleasure having this podcast. I love to be able to share this. If people are interested in learning more, I'm very active on Instagram